Once upon a time. Long, long ago. In a deep, deep mountain valley, where human footsteps rarely reached, there was a winter mountain, covered in white snow. It was a rugged place, with steep rocks and sheer cliffs. It was surrounded like a folding screen, making it difficult even for birds to rest. Today, it was a rugged place, when a fierce, biting wind blew, as if to freeze the whole world, and the bare branches collided with each other, would make mournful sounds. The sky and the earth were completely covered in white snow, making it impossible to tell where the path was, and where the cliff was in those deep mountains. Inside, there was only the sound of the wind. Occasionally, only the cries of animals broke the silence. And in these silent mountains, a young tiger, who had just been born and lost its mother, was left alone. One of them was shivering and huddled up from the cold. This young tiger cub was still fluffy and soft. Even the stripes on his back were still faint, a mere infant animal. A few days ago, with a roar that shook the mountains, he saw the mother tiger collapse, bleeding. After witnessing that, the culprit, terrified, had to hide himself deep within a rock crevice. The warmth of its mother's embrace, and the memory of her milk. For the tiger cub, the winter cold was too harsh, and the hunger that gnawed at its stomach was a pain too great for a young animal to bear. The cub, even though he knew his mother wouldn't return, he still held on to a sliver of hope. He poked his head out of the den, sniffing around cautiously, but all he found was the cold, snowy wind. It only made his nose tingle. Then one night, he was unusually restless, and the wind was blowing fiercely. Unable to bear the hunger any longer, the tiger cautiously emerged from its cave and caught an unfamiliar scent, carried on the wind. It was not the metallic smell of wild animal blood, nor was it the smell of rotting wood. It was a strange, sweet scent I had never smelled before. That, driven by curiosity and hunger, the culprit crawled up the snowy slope, slowly and carefully, moving towards the scent. He approached it. It was under a large pine tree, and there, on the white snow, a small bundle, wrapped in red silk, was placed there. As BMI cautiously approached the bundle, suddenly, a faint cry of ooh-ah erupted from within the bundle. Surprised, the culprit stepped back. And that sound wasn't the threatening roar of a beast, but a desperate plea for help, like a child's wail. Gathering courage, the culprit approached again. My father carefully touched the edge of the bundle, and inside I saw the pale face of a newborn baby who was crying. It was a baby abandoned by someone. Exhausted from the cold and hunger, my voice was barely audible. The moment I met the baby's tear-filled eyes, an unknown, burning emotion surged within my chest. The baby didn't seem surprised or scared by me. Far from being scared, he instinctively yearned for warmth and stretched his tiny hands into the air. The tiger, trembling with the sorrow and loneliness of losing its mother, was captivated by that small gesture. He pressed his body close to the baby. On the cold, snowy ground, the baby's body was freezing when the soft fur and warm body heat touched it, and the baby's crying stopped. He began to calm down. The range also, relying on the faint warmth emanating from the baby's body, he felt a sense of peace, as if he were in his mother's arms. Although they were born of different species, and the two creatures, sharing the same fate of being left alone in the world, spent their first night embracing each other. The next morning, as the red sun rose and brilliantly illuminated the snowfield, the hunger that befell the two creatures. Still unresolved. The baby was hungry again, and started crying. The culprit was also exhausted from hunger, lacking the strength to even get up. The culprit tried to soothe the baby by licking its face. But the baby hadn't been fed. The baby's crying grew louder and louder. It was then that, from the other side of the forest, a rustling sound was heard. And then a mother deer with magnificent curved antlers appeared. It cautiously revealed itself. Normally, this prey would have smelled the tiger and fled. But this prey seemed different somehow. A few days ago, it lost its cub. The deer, that was in so much pain, seemed to feel a strange sense of pity. As it looked at the crying baby and the young tiger, the deer didn't run away, but instead, it slowly approached them. And the culprit instinctively, rather than attacking its prey, looked at it with longing eyes. The prey approached the baby and settled down to nurse it. And the baby, exhausted from hunger, instinctively, he found the doe's udder and began to suckle vigorously. Beside him, Biomi also drank the overflowing milk and satisfied his hunger as the warm, rich milk went down their throats. The two lives finally. I saw hope that I could live. The hunt, for a long time, gave them milk, and then they looked at them once with deep, dark eyes, before disappearing back into the forest. From that day on, the hunt, every morning and evening, searched near the cave where Biomi and the baby were. They came looking for them, as if taking care of its own offspring. The hunt shared the milk of life with the two young lives. Biomi and the baby considered the hunt their mother, and slowly endured the cold winter. After feeding the baby, the tiger never left its side for a moment. It wrapped the baby in its fur to protect it from the cold. They didn't know the baby's name or where it came from, and the culprit, calling the baby Yun, communicated with the low growls of a beast, and they became a family. Although the cave was dark and damp, the warmth shared by the two lives made it warmer than any place. It was warmer than silk brocade. And the culprit, whenever hunters passed nearby, would prick up his ears and guard her with a low growl. He would hide Yunny behind his back. Yunny, he also giggled as he touched Bumby's coarse fur, and he played with Bumby's tail as a toy. Growing up healthy and strong, he grew up healthy and strong. Other animals in the forest watched this precious coexistence from afar, but I dared not invade their home. I couldn't, because I felt a fierce energy emanating from Biomi, unbecoming of a young beast, and a desperate will to protect Yunny. Time passed, the snow melted, and the sound of ice breaking in the valley began to be heard. And Yunai, who had been unable to leave the cave all winter, was now crawling quite well, and curious about the outside world. For Yunny, the culprit, would clear the snow from the cave entrance. He would then lead Yunny to a sunny rock and let her sunbathe under the warm spring sunlight. Yunny would climb onto Biomi's back or pulling his ears and having fun. Biomi might have been annoyed, but he silently endured Yunhui's mischief and sometimes licked Yunhui's cheek to show his affection. Instead of human words, their bodies and eyes communicated, and their presence was as natural as part of the forest. One day, a blue jay landed on a tree branch in front of the cave and looked down at them, chirping, as if it were a herald announcing the arrival of spring. The magpie circled above Yunai's and Biomi's heads, singing. Yunai clapped her hands to the sound, and Biomi yawned lazily. I will enjoy the spirit of spring. However, within the tranquility of this peaceful forest, an unseen danger always lurked. Spring, which had been dormant during winter, and human footsteps. Once again, the premonition that it would lead to the mountains stirred BMI's instincts. BMI sensed that the scent of the forest was subtly changing, and he pulled Yanai even closer into his embrace. In the village below the mountain, during winter, the precious sounds of animals coming from the mountains, and sometimes rumors began to circulate about a baby's cry carried on the wind. Woodcutters at the mountain entrance found something strange: footprints. Stories of them seeing footprints also spread next to the tiger's footprints. Small handprint-like traces simultaneously piqued people's curiosity and fear. However, BME and Yunny were still unaware of the world's commotion. We lived in our own small world, relying on each other. We were living. To Yunhi, BM was the most reliable brother and parent in the world. And to BM, Yunhi was his life. Even if it meant sacrificing everything, she was my only blood relative. The forest was just sprouting new green leaves, showing off its vitality. And the culprit instinctively wondered if they should move to a deeper, more secret place. As Yun grew, she started babbling. And because I was worried that her voice might carry outside the forest, even when BM went out to practice hunting, he didn't go far. He always lingered where Yunny could see him. Even when he was learning to catch small rabbits or mice. BM's gaze was always directed towards the cave where Yunny was. Yunny would take the small wildflowers, or playing with pretty pebbles. And growing up to be a child who appreciated the gifts the forest offered. Then one day, a person who had come deep into the forest to gather herbs. Footsteps of a strange old man were heard. The culprits bristled and growled lowly. But the old man didn't come towards their cave. He turned around and disappeared into another valley. The culprit breathed a sigh of relief. But then, he sensed that this was not the end. The scent of a human, once smelled, was like an ominous omen that couldn't be forgotten. The culprit tidied Yunny's clothes. The worn red silk. I rewrapped the swaddling cloth. And today I steeled myself for the future. I earnestly hoped that the spirits of the forest would protect them. As night deepened, BMI and Yunai fell asleep to the sound of each other's heartbeats, as a lullaby. In her dream, BMI dreamed of running freely across a wide field. And Yunai dreamed of a home with the warm smell of cooking rice. They had a dream, although their reality was a cold cave floor. Their dreams were filled with hope. The forest was their home and school, and nature was their teacher. When it rained, I learned how to avoid it. And when the wind blew, I learned how to turn my back to it. That's how BME and Yunny became children of the forest. And in a different flow of time from the human world, they were living day by day. Yoni, who had just started walking, stumbled and loved to follow Bumai around. Bumai would slow down his pace, worried that Yoni might get hurt. And with his tail, he also supported her. Sometimes, when Yunhi tripped over a rock, Bummin would quickly run over and help Yunhi up. He would lick her sore spots. Then, Yoni, as if she had never cried, smiled brightly and hugged Biomi's neck again. The profound friendship between these two lives moved even the trees and rocks in the forest, and the stars in the night sky to shine on them. It seemed to glow even brighter. However, the forest's peace could not last forever. As the snow melted and the paths were revealed, the eyes of hunters who preyed on mountain animals, began to gleam. Choi Shin, a renowned hunter in the village, was scouring the mountains, his eyes sharp, to fill his stomach, which had been empty all winter, and to obtain the valuable tiger skin. With his keen senses, he was able to track the forests. He was someone who could detect subtle changes, and he wouldn't miss even the slightest trace left by BMY and Yunai, and the ominous smell of gunpowder, mixed with the scent of flowers carried on the spring breeze, was growing stronger. Winter passed, as a warm spring breeze blew through the valley. The frozen stream began to melt, and the sound of trickling water started to break the forest silence. On the sunny hillside, yellow Adonis flowers shyly began to bloom. Even the dry, withered trees sprouted new green shoots, filling the forest with vitality. And in front of the cave where BME and Yunhee stayed, unnamed wildflowers bloomed, emitting a fragrant scent. And the warm sunlight that had shrunk during the winter of 2 lives, she gently wrapped her arms around them. Yunai now has stronger legs, and has started to toddle. And her waddling looked so cute, like a baby bear, that Biamin was captivated. I used to watch him. Bumin's downy fur was falling out, and his black stripes, which were quite tiger-like, were becoming clearer, and the majestic spirit of the king of the forest was slowly beginning to show. As spring deepened, Yonhee's curiosity grew, and the number of times she went outside the cave increased. Yonhee picked a flower from a rock crevice and put it in Biam's ear. She also put her hands in the flowing stream. She dipped her small hands in, splashed around, and burst into giggles. And every time she did, the culprit stayed by Yunhee's side like a shadow, anxious that she might stumble and fall. Even when the culprit went hunting, he would hide Yonhee in a safe rock crevice, and to erase her scent, he would rub mugwort around the area. He instinctively displayed the wisdom he learned from his mother tiger. Although they couldn't communicate, and there was a bond between the two beings, just with their eyes, they could read each other's minds. A deep bond had formed between them. When Yunai was hungry, Biamin would catch a pheasant or a wild rabbit and place it before Yunai. And Yunai, with her clumsy, he tore the meat skillfully and put it into Biam's mouth. Meanwhile, in Sanal's village, with the arrival of spring, the people who had been scarce during winter started to move around again. The woodcutters carried their A-frames and climbed the mountains to gather firewood. In spring, the village women wandered through the mountains to gather herbs and shepherd's purse. One day, a strange rumor began to spread around the village well. He had gone deep into the mountains to gather medicinal herbs. Mr. Park saw a tiger take a baby from a cliff and carry it away. That was the story. At first, people laughed at him, saying he was seeing things. And Mrs. Kim, whom he met at the laundry, when the old woman claimed she heard a baby crying in the mountains, people started to gossip. They were half in doubt, half believing her. They had heard that tigers eat people, but never that. And the talk of raising a baby is news to me. The villagers, with a mix of fear and curiosity in their eyes, looked up at the mountain and clicked their tongues. This rumor, carried by the wind, reached the village's main gate. He finally caught the attention of Mr. Choi, a greedy hunter. Mr. Choi, since his youth, had roamed the mountains as if they were his own home. A veteran who had caught countless animals, he was a hunter. He would do anything for money. He was a man who would stop at nothing, especially tiger skins, which were priceless. He always coveted. As Mr. Choi was drinking, his eyes lit up. And the tiger was carrying a baby, a tens. If so, he'll act like a mother protecting her young. So it'll be much easier to catch him. Mr. Choi, with a wicked smile on his lips. He thought he could get a tiger family. and claim he found a lost child, so he could collect a reward from the government. He was scheming. The next day, Choi Shin began to search the mountain in earnest. Unlike other lumberjacks, he knew how to move silently, like a beast, without making a sound. With an old hunting rifle slung over his shoulder, and a sturdy snare and dagger at his waist, his appearance was the very embodiment of terror for the forest animals. Choi Shin avoided paths used by people, opting instead for the narrow, rugged trails used by beasts. He didn't miss a single strand of fur left on a rock, nor a single footprint in the mud, and he meticulously examined it. His keen eyes read the subtle changes in the forest, and he found tiger droppings. He estimated how old they were, and began to narrow down the tiger's range of activity. The masters of the forest instinctively sensed an ominous presence. Crows perched on the trees, cawed loudly, and squirrels hurriedly hid in their burrows. The atmosphere of the forest became unsettling. And in the valley where BMI and Yunhui lived, near a centuries-old Zelkova tree, an old mountain magpie resided. This mountain magpie, for a long time, he was a wise bird who had watched the rise and fall of the forest. He was a bird who had watched Biomi bring a baby and raise it from the very beginning, and he had always admired it. The mountain magpie had been the smell of iron rising from that direction and the smell of gunpowder, and he immediately knew that it would bring a bloody storm to this peaceful valley. Mr. Choi spent several days in vain after wandering through the mountains, and finally I found a piece of red cloth caught in a thorny bush. It was a torn corner of the swaddling cloth he had wrapped around Yunni last winter. Choi Shin picked up the piece of cloth, smelled it, and smiled triumphantly. They're close. They haven't gone far. He muffled his footsteps and began to move even more cautiously. He checked the wind direction and positioned himself so his scent wouldn't reach the beast. He looked like a predator stalking its prey. Choi Shin skillfully set a trap on a path frequented by tigers, and covered it with leaves to perfectly camouflage it. Then, behind a nearby rock, he hid and waited. At that time, the culprit, with Yoni, was in the circular clearing, peacefully, was sending a message. Yoni was under the warm sunlight, using BMY's belly as a pillow, taking a nap. BMY, with drowsy eyes, was dozing off while keeping an eye on the surroundings. He was dozing off. At that moment Yoni, and suddenly from above, a frantic cawing sound was heard. Bum, startled, opened his eyes, and the old magpie left its nest and circled above Bum's head, cawing noisily. And unlike usual, it was the magpie's anxious gestures were clearly a signal that some danger was approaching. The culprit jumped up, pricked up his ears, and then stared in the direction the magpie was pointing. The magpie got the tiger's attention, then flew back towards the female tiger and repeated the action. It was as if it was shouting, "There's danger below, run away!" And the tiger, with its animal instincts, understood the warning. In the wind that brushed my nose, there was a faint, repulsive smell mixed in, and that was the smell of human cigarettes, and the cold smell of metal. And the culprit's back fur, I used a bone. The culprit, sensing that the piece they had enjoyed until now was about to be shattered, nudged the sleeping Yunhee with his nose to wake her up, and even though Yunhee, still half asleep, rubbed her eyes and whined, the culprit didn't indulge her as usual. He growled lowly, creating tension. Yunhee was startled by the culprit's changed attitude, and was about to burst into tears, but She was overwhelmed by the culprit's intense gaze, and kept her mouth shut. The culprit grabbed Yunhee's collar with his mouth. He tugged gently, signaling me to enter the cave. But I felt that even the cave was no longer safe. And if humans had tracked us all the way here, the blocked cave could have trapped the culprit like a rat in a jar. The culprit quickly made a decision. He climbed higher and higher, up a steep, rocky mountain that was difficult for humans to ascend. They had to move. The culprit offered their back to Yunhee, telling her to get on. But when Yunhee didn't understand, they grew impatient. Eventually, the culprit grabbed Yunhee's waist. With their mouth, he carefully picked her up. As Yunhee's body lifted into the air, the child was startled and struggled. But the culprit held his balance firmly and began to climb the steep cliff path. Sharp stones dug into his soles, and thorny bushes scratched his fur. The culprit, however, ignored everything and only ran upwards. Sangachi, too, as if understanding the culprit's intention, flew ahead, leading the way and guiding them to a safe path. Avoiding the path where Choi had set traps, and through the secret passages of animals where people don't go, BMI and Yunin instantly moved away. Meanwhile, Choi, who was ambushed in the forest below, noticed that the tiger didn't appear even after some time. He started to get anxious. He put a pipe in his mouth, puffing smoke, and looked around. Clearly, its droppings were somewhere nearby. He and Mr. Choi's own cigarette. He realized the smoke was rising with the wind, so he quickly put out the fire. He had momentarily forgotten that their animals have a keen sense of smell and would flee miles away, even at the scent of tobacco. Blaming himself for his mistake, Choi Shin sprang to his feet, and he walked past the painted area and deeper into the forest. His eyes were even more greedy and domineering than before. The culprit ran for a long time. Kakajil arrived at a small cave on a cliff face halfway up the mountain. This was a place that his mother, a tigress, had kept in mind as a hiding spot for emergencies. The entrance was narrow and covered with vines, making it difficult to see from the outside. It was like a difficult campaign. The culprit placed Yunhee on the soft dirt floor inside the cave and breathed heavily. And Yunhee, seeing that the culprit's breathing had become ragged, as if worried, reached out with her small hands to the culprit's. She stroked his nose. The culprit was momentarily calmed by Yunhee's touch, but his ears were still focused on the sounds outside. The mountain magpie sat on a branch near the cave entrance, keeping watch. And if there was any suspicious movement, as if to signal immediately, it let out short, sharp caws. The culprit lay prostrate at the cave entrance, resting its chin on its paws, while I looked down at the forest below. The forest appeared peaceful on the surface, but within it, a man with dark desires was lurking around. As the sun set in the west, casting long shadows over the forest, Mr. Choi's figure became shrouded in darkness, making him even harder to see. Night. It was a time of rest for the hunter. But for the hunted beast, it was a time of terror. Biamin vowed not to sleep a wink tonight, and to protect Yunhee. As night fell, the cave grew rapidly colder. Biamin pulled Yunhee close to him, pulled her close to his chest, and wrapped his arms around her. Yunhee listened to the regular beat of the culprit's heart, and slowly fell asleep. And the culprit's eyes glowed fiercely in the darkness. Occasionally, from down the mountain, every time a gunshot rang out, Biami's body would tremble, and that trembling was fully conveyed to Yunhee. Fortunately, Yunhee was in a deep sleep, unaware of the world But the culprit heard those gunshots. They knew it was a warning directed at them. Choi was threatening other animals in the forest to catch the tiger. And the encirclement was closing in as dawn broke. The forest was enveloped in a thick fog. The impenetrable fog became a natural shield for BMI and Yunhui. But at the same time, it was a source of anxiety, making it impossible to tell how close the enemy was. BMI was soaked. He sniffed the air through his nose, checking for any unfamiliar scents. He checked. Fortunately, the metallic smell of blood seemed a little further away, but he couldn't relax yet. The old Sangachi, all night, after a restless night guarding the nest. As morning broke, she spread her wings again and went out to scout. And all the creatures of the forest held their breath, starting their day in the tense calm before the coming storm. Yuni woke up from her sleep. She whined from hunger, because she had to flee in a hurry yesterday. She hadn't eaten anything. The culprit was in a predicament. If he went hunting, it would be dangerous to leave Yuni alone. If he kept starving her, he thought Yuni wouldn't last. I didn't think I could. After much deliberation, the culprit decided to gather wild raspberries and edible roots near the cave. He had to find them near the cave entrance without going too far. As Biamin cautiously exited the cave, Yunai, waddling, tried to follow him out. Biamin, with a firm look, stopped Yunai and tapped the ground with his paw, signaling her to wait. Yuni pouted, but knowing that Biami's word was law, she squatted at the cave entrance and waited for Biami. Mr. Choi spent the night camping in the mountains, looking for tiger tracks again. He was expanding his search in circles around the spot where he found the red cloth yesterday. His relentless pursuit was like that of a hungry wolf, never letting go of its prey. He never gave up with a tenacious grip. Mr. Choi noticed a trace where some soil had been swept off the rock, and he smiled. These rascals, he thought, they went up. No matter, even the most cunning beast is still within my grasp. He adjusted his gun and began to climb the steep slope. With long strides, his footsteps were muffled by the fallen leaves, almost inaudible. But the rustling was shaking the entire forest. The culprit, with a few handfuls of raspberries in their mouth, hurried back to the cave. And the lover eagerly ate the raspberries the culprit brought, smiling brightly, with a mouth stained red. Looking at that bright smile, the culprit's heart ached. How much stronger did he need to become to protect this small child? And how long would this life on the run continue? Because I didn't know. The culprit licked Yonhee's head and swore in his heart, even if my body breaks, I will never give you to that hunter. And the trees in the forest swayed in the wind. I heard the vow and wept sadly. In this precarious peace, time passed helplessly. The latest news was getting closer and closer, and the forest held its breath for their hide-and-seek. I was watching. Bumwai and Yunai now had nowhere left to retreat, standing at the edge of a cliff, like a dead end. The approaching footsteps were like a countdown to their fate. They was tightening around my heart. Could the culprit truly protect young Yoni from the greedy hunter's grasp? The wind in the forest grew fiercer, foreshadowing an impending tragedy. The wheel of seasons kept turning, rolling on and on. Before he knew it, the green mountains and fields were bursting with the heat of summer. The warm sunshine of spring had now turned into a scorching heat that seemed to burn the earth. and the forest was entirely covered in dark green leaves, so densely packed that even the sky was barely visible. Cicadas clung to every tree, crying out with all their might. So there was never a moment of quiet. But even that commotion, in the deep mountains, it seemed to add vitality. And around the cave above the cliff, where Biamai and Yanhui stayed, Tabnonko grew luxuriantly, like a natural curtain, covering the entrance. And thanks to that, the cave, to escape the midday heat and stay cool, he could maintain his cool. The now quite large tiger would lie on a flat rock, with his belly down when it was very hot, and breathe heavily. Yoni, also, during the changing seasons, she grew quickly, and now, beyond just crawling, even though she stumbles, she can run quite fast. However, Yoni, in a human village, he was clearly different from the well-behaved children. His clothes were so tattered that he was practically naked. His sun-kissed skin shone with a healthy bronze glow. Her hair, disheveled, was roughly tied with vines. Most of all, instead of learning to speak, Yoni imitated the cries of a tiger. And when she was in a good mood, she expressed her emotions by growling. The way he climbed the rocks on all fours was as agile as a monkey. He mimicked the culprit's actions and was instinctively learning how to survive in the forest. I felt sorry for Yoni, but also proud. I couldn't teach her human language, but Biamin taught Yoni how to smell the wind, how to walk avoiding rotten trees, and how to recognize the sounds of dangerous animals, how to distinguish them. He showed it himself. Yoni pulled on Biamai's stick, tail like a toy, and even bit it, but Biamai never got angry, and patiently endured it. Sometimes, the culprit hunts, and watches the lovers dance, with the feathers of the hunted in their hair. And the culprit watches them, not with the eyes of a beast, but with the eyes of a compassionate mother. They watch them. These two beings, bound by a bond stronger than blood. In this harsh wilderness, they were each other's indispensable soul, family. However, despite the forest's peaceful appearance, and out of sight, the shadow of a threat still loomed. The persistent hunter, Mr. Choi, even as the summer monsoon began, and rain poured down, did not descend the mountain, but roamed the forest. He searched for traces washed away by the rain. This made tracking difficult. But he, instead, used this period as an opportunity when the animal's guard was down. Choi set traps skillfully around the paths tigers frequently used and the valleys where they came to drink water. He set it up. The trap he set was so cleverly covered with fallen leaves and dirt that even the most sensitive animal could easily fall into it. It was a deadly trap. And the latest, after setting the trap, climbed a nearby tree and waited patiently for days, showing great patience. One afternoon, after the rain stopped and the sweltering heat returned, while Yoni was asleep, the tiger went out to hunt for food and quench its thirst. It carefully left the cave. Due to the rain for several days, it couldn't hunt properly, so both the tiger and Yoni were hungry. He was very hungry. The culprit followed a familiar animal trail down towards the valley. The forest was soaked with rain, heavy, and the smell of grass and earth was strong. The culprit, instinctively, he flared his nostrils, searching for scents around him. But masked by the strong smell of earth, he couldn't detect the cold scent of metal. He was almost at the stream when the culprit was drinking water. He spotted a roe deer and crouched down, so focused on his prey. The culprit didn't notice the subtle difference. In the soil beneath his feet. Just as he was about to leap towards the deer, the moment Bambi's hind leg hit a pile of rotten leaves, with a chilling snap of metal, a sharp-toothed trap clamped tightly onto Bambi's ankle. Bambi was about to scream, and in the forest, to avoid revealing his position, he swallowed the pain, emitting only low moans. The more the trapped beast struggled, the deeper it dug into his flesh, tightening its grip. Red blood began to soak the surrounding earth. The excruciating pain spread from his legs to his entire body. But all the culprit could think of was Yun, left alone in the cave. That was all he could think of. The culprit desperately struggled to escape from the trap, and the attached chain was pulled taut, restricting the range of motion. I sensed someone approaching from afar. It was clear that Mr. Choi, having heard the sound of the Dutch operating, was coming. If I get caught like this, and its skin would be peeled off. Yunny, being a child found in a beast's den, would surely become a spectacle, or be harmed by people. The tiger mustered its last strength. It tore off a piece of its own flesh, enduring the pain of being torn apart. He pulled his hind leg back forcefully, with a bone-crushing pain. The trap loosened, and the culprit, pulling out his bloody leg, limped away, and hid in the forest. Choi, who arrived late at the scene, saw the copious blood on the trap, and the tufts of fur, and smiled smiled to himself. Finally, I've got you. And since it injured its leg, it couldn't have gone far. Choi Shin checked the direction of the blood trail, and slowly and leisurely began to follow it. A wounded beast is more ferocious, but at the same time, it's weakened, making it easier for a skilled hunter. It was the perfect prey. Mr. Choi loaded his gun, and as if playing a game, he stepped on each bloodstain, closing the distance to the culprit's hideout. The forest was once again filled with tension, and startled birds fluttered and flew into the sky. Meanwhile, the culprit, bleeding, climbed the rugged rocky mountain. 700:41:49 for 6600:41:51 700, and barely reached the cave entrance. His injured leg was already swollen, making it difficult to even step on it. Today, I bled so much that my vision blurred. The lover, who was waiting for the culprit in the cave, smelled the culprit's blood and ran out in surprise. The majestic appearance he usually had was nowhere to be found. He gasped for air in pain, and as he watched BMI collapse, Yunhee's eyes wavered. Yunhee saw BMI's injured leg and cried out. He cried out, making a mournful animal sound. She hugged Bummi's neck. Bummi, with a difficult effort, licked Yunhee's cheek to reassure her, but her body wouldn't obey. Yunhee, shedding tears, suddenly remembered something. As if something came to mind, she ran out of the cave. The culprit tried to stop Yunhee, but he didn't have the strength to get up. Fortunately, Yunhee didn't go far, and from a crevice in the rocks around the cave, she picked broad, flat leaves that were growing there. It was something that one day. It was a medicinal herb applied to wounds from hunting. Yunhee, with her instinctive memory, found the plant. She carefully chewed it until it was soft, then gently applied it to Biam's wound. As Yunhee's saliva mixed with the herbal paste, and the green mixture touched the wound, the burning pain seemed to subside a little. The culprit was moved by the sight of this small child trying to save him, and his heart softened. He cried. He looked at Yunhee with his eyes. Yunhee tore a strip from her skirt and tried to bandage the culprit's wound. But she lacked the strength, and had to settle for clumsily tying it. As the sun set and darkness fell, due to BME's wounds, he started to develop a fever. BME groaned in pain and broke out in a cold sweat. Yunai never left BME's side for a moment and kept wetting BME's and helped him speak. Inside the dark, cold cave, the two lives relied on each other's body heat to endure a night of fear and pain. Outside, an owl hooted ominously. The wind, rustling the branches, sounded like a hunter's footsteps. Even in his hazy state, the culprit pricked up his ears and listened for any movement outside. The next morning, hello? And BME still couldn't get up. Fortunately, the wound had stopped bleeding, but it was so swollen that he couldn't move. Hunger overwhelmed the two lives. Yunai whined from hunger, and BME was in pain. Knowing this, he fell silent. Yunai found some dried wild berries that she had stored in a corner of the cave, and put them into BMY's mouth. BMY didn't even have the strength to swallow them. But I couldn't ignore Yunai's sincerity, so I forced myself to chew and swallow it. However, this alone wasn't enough to satisfy my hunger. And most importantly, we were running out of water. In the hot and humid summer weather, injuries and thirst became even more severe. It was fatal. At that time, Mr. Choi had climbed up to near the point where the blood trail ended. Had climbed up. As the range moved up to the rocky area, the blood trail became faint. But he had Mr. Choi's experienced eyes. He couldn't be completely fooled. He used the faint bloodstains on the rocks and the trampled grass as clues. He headed towards the cliff, where the beast was hiding. It's around here. It can't move right now. It's a rat in a trap. Choi Shin wiped away his sweat and let out a wry smile. He didn't rush, slowly closing in on the encirclement. He meticulously scanned his surroundings, preparing for a possible attack from the mother tiger, or any other unforeseen variables, showing his thoroughness. As the afternoon wore on, the air in the cave grew even heavier. The culprit suffered from a high fever, hallucinating, and snarling at the empty air. Yunai, trembling with fear, hid behind BMI. Just then, a rustling sound came from outside the cave. It was too artificial and heavy to be the sound of the wind. The culprit instinctively knew it was the hunters. I recognized them as footsteps. The culprit, enduring the pain, used Dad as a support to raise their upper body, and stood up. And their eyes shone brightly once again. And a smile appeared. The fangs of a dangerous beast were revealed. And the lover, feeling the tense muscles of the beast, held his breath. Mr. Choi found Quen and Ku covering the cave entrance at the bottom of the cliff. Subtly different from its surroundings, it was a place where someone had been in and out. He was sure of it. With a determined look in his eyes, he aimed his rifle and approached cautiously. Just then, from inside the cave, the baby's cries burst out, and it was Yunai's instinctive cry. Unable to endure the hunger and fear any longer, it was her cry. He heard this sound pierce the quiet forest. It hit Mr. Choi's ears precisely. Mr. Choi's eyes widened. It was true. The rumors were true. He couldn't hide his excitement at the thought of finding not only the tiger but also his lost child. He couldn't hide his excitement. Choi aimed his gun and shouted, "Everyone inside! Get out now!" As his shouts echoed, the culprit inside the cave lowered himself even further. He was trapped in an offensive posture. Yoni, startled by the stranger's voice, stopped crying and clung to the culprit. The culprit completely hid Yoni behind his body, and he let out a thunderous roar, towards the cave entrance. The roar was so powerful and threatening that it was hard to believe it came from an injured animal. It made every animal in the forest hold its breath. Mr. Choi was also taken aback by the unexpected force. He hesitated for a moment and stepped back. But Mr. Choi quickly regained his composure. He disengaged the safety on his gun, and with a sneer, he muttered, "Chatterbox, I'll personally check how good your hide is. I'll personally check how good your hide is." He took a torch from his pocket and lit it. Using fire, which animals fear most. Using fire, which animals fear most. He tried to drive it out of the cave. He made smoke. He intended to suffocate them. The acrid smoke from the burning torch began to be drawn into the cave entrance. Inside the cave, chaos erupted instantly. The lovers coughed in agony, and the culprit escaped the smoke. He had to retreat deeper, but it was a dead end. The culprit was at a crossroads. Should he stay trapped in the smoke and die? Or risk his life and go out and fight? The culprit, with tear-filled eyes, he looked at Yunny. Yunny was coughing, covering her mouth with her tiny hands. And the culprit made up his mind. He would become the bait to lure the hunter, creating an opportunity for Yunny to escape. The culprit gathered his last strength, wiggling his hips, preparing to leap. The pain in his legs had long been forgotten. Only the thought of saving Yunhee was on his mind, was taking over his entire body. Choi, who was waving the torch outside, heard a low growl coming from inside the cave. He felt it getting closer and closer. He tensed up and put his finger on the trigger. "Just you try to come out. I'll cut off your breath at once." On the cliff, a tense atmosphere hung in the air, and a life-or-death battle between two beings was imminent. The culprit, People's Son, stared with his eyes at the bright light at the cave entrance, and prepared for a roar that might be its last. The forest watched this tragic standoff with bated breath, anticipating the bloodshed to come. In a stillness where even the wind seemed to hold still, and only the crackling of the burning torches heightened the tension. Now that the curtain was about to rise, someone was destined to fall. Amidst BMI's heavy breathing and Choi's short, sharp breaths, Yunhee's frightened eyes shone in the darkness. Will the forest's master defeat the greedy intruder and protect their precious family? Or will human greed? Will they trample the purity of the forest? Everything will be decided in an instant. The shadow of the bear, rushing out of the cave, stretched long, and the hour of destiny flowed on, unstoppable. The flow of seasons is a natural law that no one can defy. And the hot and humid summer has receded, and before we know it, autumn has arrived, painting the mountains and fields red, and the green leaves on the trees changed into their own colors. The mountains were like a giant flame burning, covered in fiery yellow foliage. From the high blue sky, a cool breeze blew, causing the leaves to fall, and the rustling sound filled the stillness of the forest, adding to the charm of late autumn. On the cliff where BME and Yunhee stayed, Eulalia bloomed white around the cave, waving in the wind, and ripe acorns and chestnuts fell, making the squirrels busy, preparing for winter. Last summer, Biomi and his mate, who narrowly escaped the threat of Hunter Choi and the wildfire, have been living in a place untouched by humans, and moved their dwelling to the top of a higher and rougher rocky mountain, living in hiding. Fortunately, the tiger's injured leg was healing thanks to Yunhee's devoted care. But because the bone was damaged, it couldn't be like before. He couldn't run nimbly, even with his limping gait. The culprit still didn't lose his danger. And rather, the wound he got while trying to protect Yunhi looked like a glorious medal. Yunhi had now fully adapted to life in the forest. He climbed trees as nimbly as a monkey. And, just by listening to the sound of falling leaves, he could tell what kind of animal was approaching. His senses became that sharp. And under the autumn sunlight, Yoni picked up a red maple leaf and playfully tucked it into Biami's mane. She was teasing him. And Biami, with a deep gaze, looked at Yoni, and then licked the back of her hand with his rough tongue. But behind this peaceful scene, the fear of humans, who could appear at any moment, loomed like a dark shadow. Meanwhile, in the village below the mountain, the ominous rumors, spread by Hunter Choi, were growing uncontrollably, spreading rapidly. Choi. Mr. Choi, in retaliation for missing the previous hunt, began to embellish his lies, to incite the villagers. That tiger is no mere beast. It lures children away and turns them into servants. It's an evil spirit. I saw it clearly with my own 2 eyes. The child was wearing an animal skin and eating raw meat. Mr. Choi's exaggerated story stirred up people's fears. He made the parents, who had lost their children, feel uneasy. The villagers were afraid to go up the mountain, became hesitant. And at the sound of the wind, every night, they trembled, wondering if a tiger had descended. Eventually, to quell the village's unease, the village chief and young men, under Choi's leadership, they had to organize a tiger hunting party. That's what it came to. The day of the decisive battle dawned. Dozens of villagers, armed with pitchforks, clubs, and torches, led by Mr. Choi, began to climb the mountain. Their faces showed a mix of fear and determination. And the sound of gongs and drums, driving the beast, shook the entire mountain. Wow! Let's catch it! Let's catch the monster! The shouts of the people echoed deep into the forest. And the wild animals, who had been living peacefully, were terrified and fled into their burrows. Through the crimson autumn leaves, smoke from torches rose, and a murderous aura. The long line of people was like a giant snake, coiling around the mountain as it ascended. That was the image it presented. And Choi Shin, with a triumphant expression, stood at the front with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He precisely retraced the path the culprit took to escape last time, and he accurately pinpointed it, tightening the net. The cliff, the culprit, resting in a cave above, perked up his ears at the unfamiliar scent, carried on the wind and the commotion. Stopped. It was not the smell of 1 or 2 people, and the smell of sweat and iron, emanating from countless humans, mixed with the smell of burning fire, stung my nostrils. The culprit instinctively. And this time, I knew, it would be an unavoidable big fight. Yoni, who was cracking acorns nearby, sensed Biam's tension, and stopped what she was doing. With anxious eyes, Yoni hugged Biam's neck and whimpered. He made a low, guttural sound. The culprit stroked Yunhi's head, trying to reassure her, but her heartbeat only quickened. To escape. The culprit's legs weren't fully functional. And more than anything, taking Yunhi down this dangerous cliff was. It was almost impossible. The culprit had to make a decision, with nowhere left to retreat, even if he met his end here. He was determined to save Yunhi at all costs. He made a grim resolution. The culprit led Yunhi into the cave, the deepest part, and between the small crevices, he pushed me in. As if telling me not to come out, he growled sternly. Yunhi's eyes welled up with tears, and she shook her head. And the tiger with its nose, he pushed Yunhi away, preventing her from leaving. Then, with a limping leg, he slowly walked out of the cave. In the wide clearing in front of the cave, Eulalia swayed in the wind. And in the distance, the forest, I started to see people pushing their way up. They were coming. The culprit climbed onto a large rock, in the middle of the clearing. He let out a roar that shook the heavens and the earth towards Sonare. Roar, roar! It was the forest's last warning as its master, and it was a proud roar announcing his presence. The villagers. At the sudden roar of the tiger, I stopped in my tracks, my ears ringing. A thunderous sound, as if the whole mountain was echoing, was enough to make people's legs tremble. But Choi Shin, on the other hand, calmed everyone down. Don't be afraid. He's wounded now. And in the pipe, we have guns and fire. Encouraged by Choi's comrade, the people shouted again, and rushed up to the open space on the cliff. Finally, the tiger and the villagers. I came face to face with it. Against the backdrop of red autumn leaves, the tiger stood alone on a rock. Even though he was limping, he exuded an overwhelming sense of danger. Dozens of torches surrounded the tiger, and today, the tension was palpable. Choi stepped forward with a bitter smile. He stepped forward. So we finally meet. You beast. Today is my day of reckoning. He slowly raised his gun and aimed at the S forehead. And the villagers held their breath, watching the scene unfold. The culprit made no attempt to flee, but stared directly into Choi's eyes. And in those eyes, instead of fear, there was deep sorrow and rage. Choi's finger. The moment the trigger was pulled, from inside the cave, a sharp sound, almost a scream, burst out. Oh, don't go! It wasn't the cry of a beast. It was, clearly, a human voice. Everyone was startled, and as they turned their heads, a small girl with messy hair and old clothes burst out, like the wind. It was Yun. And seeing BM in danger, she, Yoni, who couldn't hide any longer, blocked the S path and spread her arms. No, don't shoot! Yoni, with her clumsy words, clearly shouted. She threw her small body in front of the gun. Then she turned around and hugged BM's neck and started to cry loudly. BM, also worried that Yunai might get hurt, lowered himself and embraced Yunai. He then faced the people and sent a wary glance. At the unbelievable sight, the villagers were speechless and stood dumbfounded. Oh my God, hey! Who is that? It's a person. A child is embracing a tiger. The murmuring spread like waves. When out, Choi was flustered and shouted. Get out of the way. That's a monster that bewitched the child. Child. Come here quickly. However, Yoni shook her head vigorously and clung even tighter to BME. And the lover growled like a beast, making noises and threatening people. He also stroked the tiger's injured leg and shed tears. The wild appearance of the child, who grew up like a wolf boy, and that ferocious beast, the sight of him becoming a gentle lamb, to the child was a complete shock. People were confused and murmuring. And he was in a situation where he couldn't easily attack. Mr. Choi must have been anxious. He tried to aim his gun again. Hey! We should just kill them all. And then, from the back of the water, an old man with a cane walked out. He was the oldest in the village. It was Old Man Park, known for his wisdom. He always respected the mountains, and taught not to kill recklessly. And Old Man Park, with trembling hands, pressed down on Choi's gun barrel with his staff, to the ground. To collect. In your eyes, does it look like an enemy beast? Elder Park's voice was low but powerful. He slowly walked towards BME and Yun. BMY growled, but when he didn't sense any hostility from Old Man Park, he didn't attack and just watched. Old Man Park saw Yun's shabby clothes, BMY's wounds, and the way the two beings looked at each other. He looked at it slowly. Tears welled up in Old Man Park's eyes. Huh. How can this be? I, a beast, raised a human. I raised him with more devotion than his own mother. Park no, he turned around and shouted at the villagers. He yelled, "Look everyone, even this creature, who takes in a child that isn't its own, cherishes and loves it so much. And you, who are supposedly the lords of creation, are we not ashamed? Can't you see how much the child adores him? Don't you know? That tiger is the child's parent. And today, a sibling, at Elder Park's rebuke. The people, in shame, bowed their heads. The torch flames swayed in the wind, as if reflecting the wavering hearts of the people. It seemed so. Choi Shin's face turned red and then pale, and he tried to retort. But that's a wild beast. We don't know when it might turn on us. Shut up, Old Man Park shouted at Mr. Choi. Your greed is more terrifying than a beast. Under the pretense of saving the child, didn't you covet his family? Even beasts know gratitude. And yet you're a human. How dare you defy the iron wheel? Put that gun down right now. The villagers, one by one, started to agree with Old Man Park. That's right. How could he be fooled when the child is coming? A tiger would never. I didn't mean to hurt you. As the atmosphere changed, Choi Shin could no longer be stubborn. He was angry and felt wrong. But he couldn't bear the villagers' stares. He huffed, lowered his gun, and stepped back. Park No-hee took out the rice cakes and dried meat he had brought from his pocket, and carefully placed them on a rock. I'm sorry. We didn't recognize you, and almost made a huge mistake. Please let go of your anger, and live well with your child. Park Rohee bowed respectfully to BMY and Yunhee, and apologized. The villagers also, one by one, brought rice balls and corn, and laid them down. He gave them an apologetic look, and backed away. Yunhee, still wary, behind BMY, he watched the scene, and the culprit let out a quiet breath, relaxing a little. Once everyone had left the mountain, and even Choi had grumbled and disappeared, silence returned to the clearing. As the red sunset began to fall, the autumn leaves burned even redder, and the warm evening sunlight fell upon the food laid out on the rocks. Yunhee carefully approached and picked up a rice cake, put it into BMI's mouth. BMI ate it and rubbed Yunhei's cheek. The two lives that had gone to the brink of death checked each other's body temperature and sighed in relief. The wind blew and sweat and cooled their bodies stained with tears. That night, the villagers walked down the mountain in silence. They said nothing. Only a heavy sense of emotion and shame remained in their hearts and brought him back. The story of a tiger raising a human, no longer a tale of fear, became a legend, and began to be passed down from mouth to mouth. Park No-hee stood at the village entrance, looking up at the mountain, and prayed that they would be happy, without human interference. Above the mountain, a bright moon rose, illuminating the cave where BME and Yunhee were, and the spirits of the forest, as if celebrating their safety, shaking the leaves, sang them a song. As the autumn night deepened, BME and Yunhee embraced each other and fell into a deep sleep. With the relief that they no longer had to flee, they rested, and they remained in their dreams, dreaming of running freely through the fields. Their love, which blurred the lines between human and beast, dyed the mountains a deeper, more beautiful color than red autumn leaves. And so the storm, after a day that felt like forever, peaceful silence, returned to the forest, where autumn's crimson tide had passed. Winter arrived, with white snowflakes dancing down once more. Mountains and fields alike were clad in pure white, and as if to silence all the world's clamor, a profound stillness enveloped the mountain village. Since last autumn, after the urgent and moving incident that occurred on the cliff, and in the hearts of the villagers, a great wind of change began to blow. They no longer saw the mountain as something to fear, or a place to be conquered. Instead, they saw it as a place where something greater than humans, a place where people share warmer affection, and a sense of awe for the mysterious beings who live there, began to take root. Walking along the snow-covered paths, people would, with my hands clasped, I faced the distant peak. Today, I prayed for Bumi and Yunhee's well-being. As the village elder, Park Nohee, couldn't sleep due to worries about the two lives in the mountains, as the weather grew colder. Even though animals have fur and caves to shelter them, she was just a child. He was worried if Yoni could endure the harsh winter wind. Park Nohee gathered the young men of the village and quietly instructed them. Don't we owe them? Don't we? We didn't recognize our own child, and he tried to harm the station master. We must atone for our sins, even if just a little. Saniak prepared a small plot in a sunny spot for us. The young men listened to Chanjang's words. I deeply empathized, and nodded my head. Instead of going up the mountain to cut down trees, he carried sturdy timber and lusk from the village on his A-frame carrier to the middle of the mountain, near the path where Bmi and Yunai frequented. For several days people toiled, building a modest but sturdy log cabin. To keep out the cold wind, they carefully applied lusk and placed a thick thatched roof on top to withstand the weight of snow. Yes, and on the floor they laid andal stones, so when a fire was lit in the furnace, a warm glow would circulate all night. Once the house was complete, the women of Anhak made thick, padded silk blankets and clothes for Yunai, warm winter clothes, and rice and dried meat. He filled the room with food like dried persimmons. The village was ready. The people watched the first fire in the furnace, and after the smoke billowed up, he hurried down to the village, so that Bmi and Yunhee wouldn't feel burdened. It was an apology, and a simple gesture of reconciliation, a wish to live together. That evening, the culprit, returning from a hunt in the forest, smelled something unfamiliar, and the savory smell of burning wood and cooking rice. With caution, he carefully approached the source of the smell. Before Bmi and Yunhui's eyes, the cozy cabin they had only seen in their dreams appeared. From the chimney, white smoke was rising, and through the cracks of the paper-covered door, warm orange light was seeping out. The culprit paced around the house, grunting and groaning. But nowhere did he sense any traps or hostile presence. He felt nothing. Only the rough but warm touch of people's hands full of her kind heart was smeared everywhere. Yunhee, with eyes full of curiosity, carefully opened the door. As the warm air embraced her cold face, a faint smile spread across Yunhee's lips. Yunhee saw the beautiful. When she saw the striped jacket and fur vest, she was overjoyed. Bumhee, too, seeing Yunhee so happy, seemed to relax. He sat on the edge of the porch and wagged his tail. Yunny changed her clothes. As if showing off to Bumwai, she twirled around. Bumwai rumbled, giving her a compliment that it suited her well. That night, for the first time since they were born, the two creatures slept not on cold rock floors. I could stretch out my legs on the warm Andal floor and fall asleep. The wind outside was still fierce, and the sound of the paper on the window rattling sounded like a lullaby. The village built this small house for them, and it became a bridge connecting the forest and the village, and for BMI and Yunhui, it became the safest home in the world. As time passed, the village and the forest, between them, an unspoken promise was formed. The villagers never ventured deep into the mountains to hunt or cut down trees. Instead, on a rock at the mountain's entrance, electrically, they would place grains and salt there. Then, the next morning, in its place, there would be wild ginseng deodiak, or other gifts from the forest, like wild boar meat. Gifts would be placed there. This is from Biami and Yunny. It was a gift in return. People called it a gift from Sangan, the mountain lord, and cherished it. If someone in the village fell ill, they would brew that herb and give it to them, and they would recover completely. And they would, even though they didn't meet face to face. This exchange of hearts warmed up the cold winter mountain village. And her Yoni has now grown into a girl who perfectly understands the language of the forest. She predicted the weather by the cries of birds, and she read the changing seasons by the scent of the wind. Even while living in the house the villagers built for her, her playground was still the vast forest. When she walked through the forest, squirrels would climb onto her shoulders, and deer would approach and lick her hand. The villagers, who sometimes went to cut wood, would occasionally see Yonhi from afar. Her light steps on the white snow rocks, her figure running around, was like a celestial maiden, descended from the heavens, and also like a spirit of the mountain, and by her side there was always a tiger as big as a house, standing guard like a loyal bodyguard. The tiger was also in its prime, and with a majestic and dignified presence, it ruled the forest. And the leg that was injured in a trap a few days ago had completely healed, leaving only a slight scar. Instead, that wound made him an even more experienced and cautious beast. When the tiger's roar echoed through the night sky, people even began to believe that the evil spirits would retreat, and the village would find peace. Once a greedy hunter, Choi, who targeted that family, became a guardian protecting the forest. And he was no longer a beast harming people, but was revered as the village's guardian deity. Choi repented for his wrongdoings. And quietly, I heard rumors that he left the village, and that he would no longer hunt wild animals, but plow the fields, and live there. One night, when the snow was falling heavily, Park Rohi couldn't sleep, so she opened the door, and sat on the porch. I was looking at the mountains. The whole world was turning white. And in the distance, from a hut on the mountainside, I saw smoke rising. Looking at that smoke, Park Nohi muttered to herself, "You're doing well. I wonder if you're cold. I wonder if you're hungry." And that's when it happened. Two faint shadows through the snow were seen coming down to the village entrance. Old Man Park rubbed his eyes and looked closely, and it was a continuous range. They were not trying to enter the village, but standing on a hill overlooking the village. And quietly watching the lit-up houses, Park Rohi held her breath, watched them. Yunai then bowed deeply towards the village, offering a profound bow. It was a gesture of gratitude to the people who had saved them, and cared for them. Bamai also bowed his head. It was as if they were exchanging a silent greeting. The sight was so solemn and beautiful that Park No-hee unconsciously rose from her seat and bowed back. A moment later, the two shadows disappeared into the snowstorm again, slowly disappeared into the distance. Old Man Park. For a long time, he stared at the spot where they had vanished and shed hot tears. It wasn't just a beast and a child, but the innocence that humans had lost, and, because they were the teachers who awakened me to the greatness of nature. That night, Biomi and Yunny returned to their cabin and lay on their stomachs on the warm andal floor. In the fireplace, the firewood burned, crackling and blazing, made a pleasant sound. The room was filled with the sweet aroma of roasting sweet potatoes, and the lover, while combing Bamwai's nape fur, hummed quietly. It was an imitation of a lullaby that had once drifted from outside the forest, and to BMI it was sweeter than any music in the world. BMI, with drowsy eyes, looked at Yunai, then rested his large, heavy head on her lap. On her lap, Yunai stroked BM's ears. Thank you, BM, for being by my side, she whispered. Instead of answering, BM purred a low rumble that vibrated through his whole body. The sound reached Yunhee's heart, giving her deep peace. Outside the window, it snowed all night, covering all the world's scars and pains in white. Their cabin in the woods was as quiet and peaceful as a fairy tale. They didn't know it, but in the distant future, people would call this mountain BM and Yun's mountain. And I will tell you the legend of a time when humans and tigers lived as brothers. Even in that harsh world, if they trusted and relied on each other, they could overcome any cold and hardship. As a warm testament, now the ranger and his lover journey into the dream of a long winter night. In that dream they are no longer being pursued. He is no longer alone. They run freely across vast fields, dipping our feet in a clear stream. Just a happy family, together forever. And as the blazing firewood dies down, leaving only a gentle charcoal glow to warm the room at this hour, the small house in the forest, it's filled with the warmest love in the world. It is. I hope you all tonight, like Yunhee, who fell asleep with her face buried in the warm fur of a tiger, have a cozy and peaceful dream tonight. As mountains and fields sleep on this quiet night, the story ends here. Listen to the lullaby and sounds the wind brings, and sleep peacefully.